Okay, so I just wanted to say that next week, all goes well, I will be in Israel at this time. Yes, should have landed at this time. Where Lenore and I are going to Israel next Sunday evening for our nephew's wedding, which will be the following week. So the next 2 Mondays, we will not have Jews in the news. Well, because next week I'll be in Israel. The week after that, still in Israel, but it's Memorial Day anyway. So federal holiday, I don't think I would have had the class anyway that morning. And then the following Monday is Shavuot. So the second day of Shavuot, Yizkor, that morning. So the next 3 Mondays, no class. So I think after that, the week after Shavuot, we'll have one more Jews in the news, and then we'll take a hiatus until after Labor Day. So kind of our classes that we offer are kind of on the academic schedule. And so we'll do it that way. So you'll see on the shul calendar anyway, when the next Jews in the news will be. So I thought today that we would talk about gun control. And clearly what prompted me to do it today, which tragically could do any Monday, because there are so many events that happen, so many shootings that happen in our country. Just this weekend, the shooting in Buffalo at a supermarket that was targeted. A man drove several hours to that particular supermarket in order to target African Americans, and 10 people killed, many more injured in that shooting. And then yesterday at a church in Orange County, California, and where the shooter there was hogtied, the news said, by the congregants. So as I said, these are just the last two in a horrific series of mass shootings that have happened in our country. So the issue of gun control, all these issues are political issues, obviously, but I just want to give a Jewish perspective on these issues before I open it up for conversation, questions, and comments. Just to have us understand what our tradition tells us and how it guides us through these issues that we face as American Jews. How are American values informed by our Jewish tradition and our Jewish identity? So Jews and guns don't usually go together. Okay, the average Jew is not likely to own a gun. Now, that could be different today, and there are articles. If you just Google Jews and guns, an article came up from My Jewish Learning, and that website, by the way, My Jewish Learning, is a great website to go to. It's like having a Jewish encyclopedia on the internet. So if you have the Encyclopedia Judaica at home, that's great. But otherwise, just go to My Jewish Learning and search any topic, and there'll be articles there to get you started on the road for deeper learning. So it says here in that article that there was a 2005 study done by the American Jewish Committee. So clearly outdated. It's 17 years old. But 17 years ago, only 13% of Jewish households in America owned a firearm. So that's pretty compared to 41% of non-Jewish homes. Okay, so that's 2005. So I don't know what it is today. I would imagine the percentage is a bit higher today. Just guessing, I don't know. But if 41%, so nearly half of non-Jewish homes in America own a gun, and 13%, so just 1 in 10 Jewish homes own a gun. That's pretty low, and it just represents just a Jewish attitude to guns in general. In other words, there are a lot of American homes where it depends on the region and the country, where it is common for people to go hunting. And hunting is not a Jewish thing to do. It really isn't. Jews don't hunt. So that would be one major reason to I want to do one thing here. I just want to mute all. And now here come my parents. Jews don't hunt because there's the Jewish value of Sa'ar Ba'alei Chaim, and that which is feeling sorry or feeling the pain of animals. So hunting for sport is not a Jewish value, and hunting for food is also not a Jewish value, because the only way we can eat an animal is if the animal is domesticated, right? So an animal has to be on a farm, and then the animal's transported from the farm to the slaughterhouse. And at the slaughterhouse, a Jew who is certified to do so as a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, slaughters the animal in the requisite way, by reciting a blessing first and then slaughtering the animal. So hunting the animal, right, going out into the woods and catching a deer. So we're also limited in the animals we can eat too. Deer happens to be a kosher animal. Okay, so but you can't hunt a deer in the woods. You cannot set a trap for the deer in the woods. So whether with a bow and arrow or a rifle or a shotgun, that's not a way in order to kill a deer and then eat the deer as a religious Jew. Okay, there has to be a deer farm, and the deer has to be transported from the farm to the slaughterhouse, or a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, could come to the farm and kill and slaughter the deer there, but that's how it's done. And because observant Jews know this about eating food, Jews don't hunt. So that's not to say that there wouldn't be Jewish hunters around, but it's just not something that we as Jews are trained to do. It's not part of our culture. Okay, so one main reason to own a gun would be for hunting, and that alone means that Jews wouldn't be likely to own a gun. Now, the other reason to own a gun would be in self-defense. Or let me say this. You can own a gun because you want to collect guns. Okay, nothing wrong with collecting guns. And certainly from a Jewish perspective, if I were to walk into somebody's house, let's say, God forbid, a Shiva house, and I would see a collection of guns there, I would think that would be odd. Again, because it's just not a Jewish thing to do, to have guns around, even if there are no bullets in those guns. And even if there are no bullets stored separately from those guns in the house, it's just an odd thing that you just wouldn't associate guns with Jewish homes. Okay, but there's nothing wrong with collecting guns. And if you're into that, you're into history, and like Civil War is your thing, or Revolutionary War is your thing, and you want to collect guns from those wars, gesundheit, That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Okay. So Jewishly, to collect guns, not a big deal. Now, to own a gun and be prepared to use it in self-defense, that's the question here that I think is part of the conversation of gun control. Should we, is it appropriate to limit ownership of guns and to regulate what kind of gun we can buy? So it is clear, and I said this last week as part of our discussion of abortion, it is clear from Jewish law that we are allowed, and if not only allowed, but required to defend ourselves if someone clearly is coming to kill us. So how do we defend ourselves from someone who is about to hurt us, if not kill us? Well, we are, if we're trained in Krav Maga or some other kind of martial art where we can use our hands and legs and we feel confident in our hands and legs in defending ourselves, okay. But if we're not, it clearly, according to Jewish law, we would be permitted to have a gun in our home or some other weapon in order to defend ourselves. And if we don't have a gun in our home, if you have a baseball bat, if you have a kitchen knife, something like that, that would be appropriate. But can we go out to a gun store, buy a gun, take lessons in order to use the gun, and then have the gun safely stored in our homes for self-defense? Yes, Jewishly, that would be an appropriate thing to do. The question about this is about, do we advocate, should we be in the forefront in gun control as a social justice issue for regulating who is allowed to buy a gun, regulating the kind of gun that we're allowed to buy, and then mandating also strict licensing requirements, that is training, required lessons and things like that? I would say from my Jewish perspective, that all of these things are appropriate, and I would say they would be Jewishly appropriate too. So I think, if you think about why one would need to own a gun in America today, for hunting or for self-defense or for gun collecting, there is no reason why people should be allowed to buy submachine guns, rapid fire submachine guns, AK-47s, things like that. There's absolutely no reason why anyone, an upstanding citizen, should be allowed to buy such a gun. And I would strongly advocate and think that it is a Jewish position to say that there's no reason why, and we should be advocating for the prohibition of legal sale of submachine guns, rapid fire submachine guns. Absolutely no reason to have that. Now, sure, if people want to buy a rifle, single action rifle for hunting or for self-defense, absolutely, right? And so I know that the Constitution of the United States, one amendment says the right to bear arms. You read the whole thing, it's for self-defense and for setting up a militia. But self-defense, I would imagine, from my perspective, that the founding farmers, think about the restaurant, I'm thinking about the founding fathers. If they knew about submachine guns, I don't think that I would imagine that there would have been debate in Continental Congress or in the Constitutional Convention 200 years ago to say that we don't want the average citizen to own a submachine gun, that would be under the purview of the Army, of the police, or other law enforcement agencies. The average citizen should not be allowed to own a submachine gun. Okay, so from the Jewish perspective, if we have the right, as I just explained quickly, that Jewishly we have the right to self-defense, we don't need to have a submachine gun in order to defend ourselves. Okay, so Judaism is all for from my perspective, is all for regulating the things that we are allowed to own, right? Judaism regulates what we eat. Judaism regulates what we wear, right? We're not supposed to wear a garment that has a mixture of wool and linen in it. So Judaism, the Torah and the rabbis regulate other things about our lives. It's certainly appropriate to regulate the ownership of guns too. I think also when it comes to dangerous weapons, that it is appropriate in order to be licensed to use it, you have to be trained appropriately to use it, and you should be there should be rules to make sure that your training stays up to date, right? Motor vehicles are dangerous weapons, and you can be convicted of manslaughter in how you drive your car and the mistakes that you make when driving your car. So we need to pass a test, both written and driving, in order to get a driver's license. I would firmly advocate the further tests to renew our licenses, but most states don't require any more tests. Once you have a license, you can renew forever. So if you license the use of a car, how much more so should we license the use of a gun? So absolutely, I think Judaism would say that as part of gun control, that people need to be licensed to do it. And also, who can own? So I think that dangerous weapons, the rabbis knew about dangerous weapons, and they knew that we have to be careful with the use of these dangerous weapons. And I'll give an example. What the example that comes to mind is the goring ox. There's a section of Jewish law that deals with farmers who own an ox, and oxen are dangerous animals if they're not kept behind their fence in the right way. And oxen tend to gore other animals, and they could gore people with their horns. And oxen, then the owner of the ox is held responsible for the damage the ox does to other animals, to other people's trees or property, or to other people. And oxen are known as goring oxen. There can be a category if a particular ox is known to have gored someone or people, that ox becomes in the category of a goring ox. And then the owner of that ox is held to a higher standard to ensure that that ox doesn't do damage. And if it does do damage, because everybody knows that that's a goring ox, if it does damage again, then the owner of that ox is held to an extremely high standard, and could, even if that ox killed someone, then that owner of the ox, I'm not sure is executed, but could be executed if if the ox kills someone. Okay, so the owner of an ox, a dangerous weapon, is held to extremely high standards to ensure the safety of other people around that ox. So we can apply these principles to the ownership of other dangerous weapons like a gun. Okay, so it's one thing to own an animate object like an animal that can damage other people. You know, it's also, we can also apply this to a pit in your field. You have, if you own a field where, or if you own property where the general public walks by, you have to put up a fence around any pits in the ground to make sure that people don't fall in. And if people do fall into the pit that's on your property and someone gets hurt, you're held responsible for the injury to that person, because you have this thing that can hurt someone. You have a hole in the ground, you have an ox that can hurt somebody. You have the responsibility to ensure that nobody gets hurt. So again, we apply these rules to the ownership of guns. We have to make sure that the gun is in the right hands. And if someone is not capable of owning a gun, whether because of mental illness or age or not passing the licensing exam, then these are reasons to withhold ownership of a gun from that particular person, and that we have the right to, Jewishly, to insist that we ask questions about who's going to own the gun and whether they are eligible for health reasons or otherwise to own a gun. So, so I think then the issues are that Judaism says ownership of a gun for self-defense is okay, but at the same time, we can mandate gun control legislation in order to ensure the safe use of a gun and the other people's safety from people who own guns. That these are Jewish concepts, and that we should be advocating for that. Any questions or comments about this?
You know the expression from that Tevye says, if they would agree, I would agree?
Uh-huh.
Well, I think most of us would say, yeah, there should be tests.
Yeah.
There should be an age limit. You should not be allowed to modify a weapon like that idiot, that murderer did.
Right.
But getting it passed through, I know you don't want to make this political, but getting it passed through the right-wing legislatures that we have is pretty impossible.
Right. No, I understand that. And again, this isn't a political discussion, but I would just say, if we want to be involved politically with social justice issues and get involved with gun control organizations that advocate a gun control legislation, passing such legislation, you know, starting with our own state, Maryland state delegates and senators, and then our congressmen and US senators, our governor, etc. There are lobbying organizations and other organizations that represent gun control issues. And I would strongly encourage us to get involved in that. So a couple of years ago, after the shooting at the Parkland High School, right, the Stoneham Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, where the high school kids themselves started an organization, March for Our Lives, I strongly advocated when they had a rally a couple of weeks later on the National Mall It was on a Shabbat. So what was that? 4 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago already. Tragically, we forget. There are so many shootings like this. I just don't remember exactly when that was. I strongly advocated that we attend that rally, even though it was on Shabbat. And so we had services here in Shul, but my wife and I went, got a hotel room downtown. We were able to walk to 6th and I encouraged people to meet us at 6th and I for Shabbat morning service, and then walk from there just a couple blocks to Pennsylvania Avenue to be part of the rally. And I was extremely proud that we had 15 people from the shul show up for the rally that morning. So there are sometimes I do take a political stance and advocate for a political stance. I don't often do that, but I do. Like I was advocating that we attend the rally for abortion rights tomorrow, right? And in my discussion about Jewish views of abortion last week, I didn't say this then, but if we have a choice to advocate for pro-life or pro-choice in this country, because that's just how the organizations come down, then clearly for me, we should be advocating with the pro-choice people. Because Judaism, yes, Judaism is pro-life, but not blanket pro-life. No, Judaism is not. We are in favor of abortion for certain reasons. And because we're in favor of it sometimes, we're not blanket pro-choice for birth control, like I explained last week, but for other reasons, then therefore we fall on the pro-choice side. And therefore the conservative movement organizations, the Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue, are among the co-sponsors of that rally tomorrow. And I felt very comfortable, not just advocating that we attend that rally, but even hiring a bus to take us down to the rally for people who want to. So there's certain political issues that I feel strongly about that I am willing to advocate them from the Bima, and even though there could be people on the other side. So I can understand that. So I rarely speak against a political candidate. Okay. I did speak against Donald Trump in 2016. I did. I spent a Rosh Hashanah sermon talking about that. And I know that took a great chance in doing that. And probably in hindsight, I shouldn't have done that. But I think it's important for moral, ethical, religious reasons to take a stance like that and to use the Bima to do that. So yeah, and according to rabbinic contracts, not just my contract with Sharei Tefillah, but rabbis' contracts in America tend to allow rabbis to speak about political issues from the Bima. Now, I think that I would think that if a rabbi does that all the time, and especially focuses on one political issue all the time, I think the congregation would be in its right to meet with the rabbi and encourage the rabbi not to do it so much. I get that, but sometimes issues arise that are important for people to understand what the Jewish view is and that how it's important it is to take a stance for it. So when it comes to gun control, I think it's horrific. And it's a shanda, I'll just use that Yiddish term. It's a shanda that that people are dying in this country from mass shootings. Now, I have no idea how to stop it. And I have no idea if gun control legislation will put a stop to mass shootings. But anything that would make it more difficult to purchase a gun illegally, no, to purchase a gun, and that hopefully by domino effect, it would be harder to access guns in the black market. I'm all for that. I'm all for that. So that, the harder it is to own a gun, the harder it is to use that gun to commit a crime. I think that's common sense. I'm oversimplifying. I know that. I understand that. But I think that Judaism teaches us that gun control legislation is is a common sense thing to do. Lori.
I was curious how gun control issues are addressed in Israel.
Yes, so very good. So there are lots of countries around the world, not just Israel, where there are extremely tight gun control laws on the books, where it's nearly impossible to be able to own a gun if you are an average citizen of a country. Because so in Israel, there are a lot of people. If you go to Israel anytime, you'll see people with not in uniform with a gun in a holster. And they are, they're a reserve officer, or they have a reason to be walking around with a gun. Okay. So it's not so unusual to see people walking around with guns, but almost everybody, all Jews in Israel, serve in the army, men and women. So they are all, as part of their army training, they have to learn how to use a gun and a rifle and however many kinds of weapons they are trained to do. And when they come home for Shabbat, while they're still in the army, they bring their weapon home with them. But they are there's extreme measures that they have to do to be sure that that gun is stored safely when they are off their army base. So people know how to use their guns. But those very same people, once they are done with their army service, if they want to own a gun and get a license to do that, it's very difficult to do that. You have to have a reason to own a gun. You have to present that reason. There aren't, in Maryland, there are gun shops around, right? I picture one that's at where University Boulevard and Connecticut Avenue meet. There's like this little brick building there that's like a hobby shop and a gun shop. So there's one right there. And there are other gun shops around that you can go into, and there's a waiting period to buy the gun, so you can't walk out with the gun. But a couple days later, you can go back and get your gun. It's fairly easy to get one, and you can own it. I think you can own a gun in Maryland without having to pass any kind of training for it. I don't know for sure, so don't hold me to that. In Israel, you have to have training in order to own a gun. So this is just based on this My Jewish Learning article. So there's training required before you can own the gun. You have to have a reason to own the gun, and you have to pass psychological tests to own a gun as well. And according to this article, again, from several years ago, 80% of people, they're quoting from that particular year, 80% of people who applied to buy a gun in Israel were denied. So, so guns are available in Israel if you serve in the army and you're in active training or in reserve duty, but otherwise, it's really difficult to own a gun. And there are lots of other countries where that's the case. Now, it doesn't mean that shootings don't happen in those countries. Their weapons are available on the black market. The more money you have available to yourself, the easier it would be to obtain a weapon. But if it's really hard to do that, then the amount of crime committed with a gun would be harder to do too. Any other questions or comments about this? Sometimes social justice issues are pretty straightforward, and most people agree with them. And so I didn't think that there would be anybody who would like stand up for the National Rifle Association and say, any limits on owning any kind of gun is against our constitutional rights. So I know from my understanding of Judaism that National Rifle, the NRA position, is not a Jewish position. Okay, so now that being said, I would say this too, how about going to a shooting range to fire a gun? I'll tell you this. I'll tell you a funny story. For a couple of years, we lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So when I was in 6th grade and 7th grade, the summer after 6th grade, I went to day camp that was run out of the JCC. And would you believe, now I'm 12 years old, would you believe that an elective activity from the camp was to go to a shooting range? Can you imagine this today? Jewish kids going to a shooting range and at summer camp to learn how to shoot a rifle? But that's what I did in Allentown, Pennsylvania when I was 12 years old. Okay, run for a summer camp run by the JCC. Just thinking about it now, I laugh. How absurd is that? Can you imagine? Imagine the JCC here in Rockville in their summer camp taking kids to the firing range of the police academy. Imagine the pushback from parents about that. Incredible. But that was 1974, 73, summer of 73, maybe either the summer of 73 or the summer of 74. I don't remember. One of those summers. It was just crazy. Anyway. So yeah, if you want to go to a firing range, and in this enclosed environment, very safe environment, to learn to do target practice, absolutely nothing not Jewish about that. So Lori did that too. That's crazy.
Yeah, it wasn't a fire, it was an activity. It was a regular activity.
Yeah, well, we went on a bus
do
to go to the police
riflery.
firing range and learn how to shoot a rifle.
Yeah,
It
and we
was
did
target
bows,
practice. Yeah.
we did bows and arrows too, which could be dangerous.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, no, that summer camps. I know this at Camp Ramon, Palmer, Massachusetts, where our kids went. They do
Archery.
archery. Yes, yes, theoretically it can be dangerous, but you really have to
Right,
really
but the
try
rifles
hard
even more so. I mean,
Yes.
unbelievable.
Right. So anyway, what was I going to say? Oh yes. So as a result of Pittsburgh Tree of Life and the shooting there on that Shabbat a couple of years ago, there was a question about security in our synagogue and security in synagogues across the country, whether synagogues would allow their own members to carry a gun into shul on Shabbat. Okay, so that's an interesting question here, part of this gun control conversation. And there are a couple people in our congregation who have concealed carry permits. And so not only do they own guns, but they have concealed carry permits. And a couple of those people approached me and said, I would be comfortable carrying my gun into shul on Shabbat, and that I'm here to be able to be a line of defense. I was not comfortable with that. I really was not. I'd rather have a trained armed security guard, not a member of the synagogue, but a security guard from a security firm to protect us rather than a member of the synagogue. Because you can just imagine, God forbid something were to happen, and then a member of the synagogue who's dressed as a civilian gets up with a gun, and then a police officer comes in at that time, the crossfire that could happen. Yeah, so I was not in favor of this. I talked to a couple of people about this at the time, so it wasn't just my decision. We agreed, no, we do not want people, members of the synagogue, even though they have a license to do so, to be carrying a gun into shul. Shul is a safe place, and we have sanctuary. Understood that when you come into the sanctuary, it's like what happened in Texas back in January, right? The rabbi opened the door to this stranger and offered a cup of tea. Yeah, so I'm not sure I would have done that, open the door to that person, but I don't know. I don't blame the rabbi for doing that. because that's what synagogue is. A synagogue is a place for people to come in and seek refuge and feel safe. So yes, we want everybody in the building to be safe around each other, and there should be safeguards in place to ensure our safety. But I think it goes over the top when we say that feel free to bring a gun with you to shul. It goes against the meaning of Shabbat, the meaning of what we're gathering for. Any other? Yes, Sylvia.
Well, you didn't have to really go to camp to learn how to shoot. You could go to Coney Island and go to any of these places that have shooting ranges, and you win a prize if you really get good at the game.
Yeah, but that's an air gun. It's not a real gun.
But nevertheless, it's teaching kids.
Yeah, that's
shooting.
true. Right. Yeah, and you have the pop guns as
Right.
a kid too. Yeah, I never had one of those, but yeah, I had friends who had them. And yeah, and you dress up, you know, some kids dress up on Halloween as cowboys, right? Carrying a gun with
Gangsters.
them and toy pistols. Yeah, yeah. Or if you have a water gun, right? On a hot summer day, they're having a water fight like that with a water gun. I had water guns. So yeah, it's a slippery slope, Sylvia. It really is. I'm sure there are some parents who would say no guns of any kind, even if it's a toy water pistol. It just gives we don't want our children to learn that guns are okay, even if it's a toy water pistol. I can understand parents advocating that. And I could see, I would absolutely support that position. But again, it's a slippery slope. If you allow, you know, what about all these games, computer games that people of all ages play, where, you know, it's like mass shooting happening all the time in this computer game, and you win by killing the most people. And so there's the computer games, there are TV shows, right? So there is a subconscious or even outright conscious kind of lesson that kids are learning that guns are cool. And so I think with everything that we see on TV and we see in the media, it needs to, for our kids, we need to have honest, open conversations with them about what this is about. And though we see these computer games and that your friends might be playing these games, this is just not something we do, right? Because these are the values that we want to teach you, and these computer games or these toys just don't fit in with what we're trying to teach you. Okay, so I think these kinds of conversations are very important. And so for all these social justice issues, you know, how we teach our children and how we have conversations within our community are extremely important, so that we have so we learn all sides of the issues. Yeah, Robert.
Two things. From the Midwest, we had the same thing at the Camp Sabra.
Oh yeah,
with the rifles.
Wow.
And I had guns as a kid. That's what we played with.
Right.
But have I ever owned a gun? No.
Exactly.
Do I ever want to own a gun? No.
Right. Right. So yeah, so most people are like that. And right, as a toy, it's one thing, but to actually own a real one, yeah, that's something else.
And I'm surprised I didn't see you at the rally along with the 300,000 other people. Congressman Raskin organized a bus, and a bunch of people took that.
Oh, you mean on Saturday?
On the Fight for Our Lives, or the anti-gun violence thing several years ago.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, so I was there. I was there. I have pictures on Facebook to prove it. So,
But
okay.
I
Yeah.
think you're right. It's part of our culture. I don't know anybody among all the Yids I know that own a gun, except my brother-in-law. When he had a store in the city, he had one.
Right. Yeah, that could be. That could be, right. Yeah. So, yeah. Jules, did you have a question? No, okay. Okay. Yeah, Lori, go ahead, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, more like a question, comment, not
Yeah.
knowing fully the answers, but it just seems like we're a very violent society. And my understanding is more so, than at least certain other countries. And so I just looking at the causes of why we're
Right.
such a violent society.
Yeah, no, that's again, that's beyond my purview. I'm not a sociologist. I don't study culture, and certainly comparative culture studies. I don't know what is it like in Canada versus America. There are shootings that happen in Canada, but certainly.
Yeah, I think Michael Moore made a movie. It's much more violent in the US
Right.
based
So
on that.
yeah, no, absolutely. But again, if you can believe Michael Moore in that documentary, but I'm sure studies have been done
Mhm.
about gun culture in other countries, in Canada, in England, in Japan, other countries like this. And what is it? What are kids exposed to in those countries while they're growing up? Is that part of it? Or what about gangs? The prevalence of gangs in those countries as opposed to our country? What are other mitigating factors?
Yeah, and the origin story of our country.
Right. So I just don't know. I really don't know enough to be able to answer this question. But there are, it's not easy to answer it, but there are lots of factors that go with it. I'm just here just to present the Jewish view of it.
Yeah.
But it's important. It's important to understand how we can change the culture. So again, Jewishly, I'm not saying to Southerners that you shouldn't be hunting anymore. And I'm picking on Southerners because it's common in the South for people to go deer hunting and whatnot. So I wouldn't advocate to stop hunting, but I would be advocating to limit what you hunt with and what kind of gun you're allowed to buy, et cetera, et cetera. I think those are appropriate things that we should advocate for on the federal level to make an impact, positive impact on the safety of everyone in our country. All right, so have a good rest of the day, everybody. And again, so the next 3 weeks, no Jews in the news because I'll be in Israel next week. And then Memorial Day, I'll be in Israel then too. And then the following week, 3 weeks from today is Shavuot. The second day of Shavuot is Yizkor, so no class then. So 4 weeks from today will be our next class.
Oh, okay. Is the class, will that be the last class or is it?
Yes, I think that will be the last class the week after Shavuot. So that would be June, what is that day? June 13th, something like that, the 12th, 11th, whatever that.
Monday.
Yeah, Monday the 13th. Monday, June 13th will be our last class. Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good trip.
Thanks.
Good call.